Hi, I'm Gene Powell. You're not. I'm President and Chief Creative Officer of Spoke, and I'm also co-founder of StartUp Toledo. And it's great to see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces. Thank you so much for coming. Really, really glad you're here. In case you didn't know, and this is your first time, StartUp Toledo is it's a monthly showcase of our brightest innovators, creators, and entrepreneurs. And tonight's guests are going like this. They're going are no exception. It is with that I would like to introduce tonight's guests. You know them as the owners of Ramsey Brothers Restorations and owners of the iconic Dart Boat brand. Did you guys see the boat out front? Beautiful. Okay, don't go now if you haven't seen it because it'll just interrupt things. But on your way out, just go through this door. You're not going to sound an alarm or anything like that. It's beautiful. It is a work of art, right? You agree? You should. You really should. Okay. And occasional dabblers in city politics, and you don't have to go there tonight if you don't want to. Don't want to make you uncomfortable, all right? But we really want to hear. I know them as Scott and Dave Ramsey. Please give a rousing StartUp Toledo hand for the Ramsey brothers.
Thanks, Gene, for having us. We're relatively unscripted, so we figured we'd just go through every project we've ever done with about 10 slides each. Actually,
2 hours.
Right, exactly. So we'll be good. My brother's actually going to control my pace by flipping the slides when he gets tired of listening to me. So we are pleased to next month recognize 10 years of being in the Uptown neighborhood. We didn't enter our business with a great plan. David and I were pursuing an unfulfilling career in indoor air quality. We were crawling through ductwork, we were installing filtration and keeping people generally healthy, which was, I suppose, good, but not really inspirational. And so we had intended to get into the classic boat restoration business, and it had been a hobby for a long time. This was a boat that was my father's, and it was given to him by my uncle in the 5th grade. My dad very confidently said to all the neighbors, "We're going to have it in the water in several months." So when I was graduating from college and had met my wife, it saw the water for the first time. But that's kind of what put a start to our whole boating thing. So this is my boat, that's Dave's boat. These are boats we've had for a while and used with our family. And so it was kind of a hobby, and we all decided we needed a building. So we said, where's a reasonable building? Well, let's look in Uptown because we lived in the old West End. So we found a building, we put our own boats in there, and we stored some other boats for friends, family, just to kind of cover the mortgage. Well, I ended up getting laid off, and Dave quit his job 2 weeks later because we said, well, that's the kick in the butt to start our own business. So we quick printed some business cards on our computer and trucked off to a boat show down in Florida. And on April Fool's Day of 2006, our first major job showed up, who had found us through a lousy GeoCities website that still exists because I can't delete it. And that was kind of how we were off and rolling. This is a 1947 Gravette that was a complete rebuild, and it was featured in a magazine. And if you notice, it's kind of an open cockpit layout, has an engine box in the middle, and the guy drives it like a maniac. He wanted a cosmetic restoration and a new engine, which we obliged and did, and couldn't convince him to do a new bottom until 2 days after picking it up, he put a hole in the bottom of the boat. So it came back, got a full new bottom, and then he decided that he didn't like the layout of it and wanted a triple cockpit runabout, but he liked his boat. So we redesigned the entire boat, his original boat, as a triple cockpit runabout, which is what he had wanted. So that was kind of our first major project. It went to a lot of shows. It got our name out a little further. And we started, due to the level of detail on some of the work, we started generating a lot of component restoration for other shops. And so that's one niche that we've tried to fill, is doing high quality components for other restoration shops. Because a lot of the individuals that get into our market are carpenters and finishers, but they don't like to do the metalworking, the fabrication, or the custom components. And so this is another boat that was an interesting case study. We had a storm, a high water situation in 2007, which brought us a lot of work. And this boat crammed up against the lid of its hoist. And so that's how we met this customer and did the whole cosmetic restoration on this one. We did some instrumentation and some interior work, varnish, some rechroming. This is another Lyman restoration. We do a lot of Lyman's around here. They're built in Sandusky, Ohio. They're a good rough water boat. This particular boat, which boat is this one? What's that? This is a Chris Craft Continental that's been an ongoing project. This is a full bottom. We do a lot of structural bottom repairs. The original bottoms were designed to last about 7 years. If you read Chris Craft literature, they expect you to renew your bottom construction about every 7 years to keep it from leaking. So we provide a no-soak bottom that'll last nearly indefinitely if cared for well, so you don't have to swell the wood boats, which is the common old wives' tale. This boat had Chris Craft's signature blonde and mahogany stain finish, which is kind of an interesting color treatment. Those are new decks that we put on. This is a Century Cheetah, which is a fiberglass boat, which didn't really fit what our initial mission was, but now we're finding customers that grew up in the 50s and 60s with fiberglass boats, and that's a classic boat to a lot of people these days. So it's a market niche that we have found is a lot faster than the wood boats because you can turn a boat around in a month or two as opposed to a year or so. This was a little Thompson lapstrake. This is a boat bar we built for a house in Brooklyn, Michigan. The gentleman had 14 feet of space and wanted something that looked like a barrelback Chris Craft. So we built him a condensed barrelback Chris Craft with a dishwasher, countertops, sink, disposal, and put it in the basement so he can get in an elevator in his office and ride down to his basement and make a drink at his boat bar and look out at the water. This is a replica of a Western Fairliner that we also met during the 2007 storm. This boat barrel rolled down the river in its shore station in Perrysburg, and we had to pick glass out of it and fix a bunch of fractures and revarnish it. So Western Fairliner is a unique double-ended boat that handles terribly because it's pointy at the back and the front, which didn't work out so well, so we added some turning fins. These are components we build for other shops, and the risk of this presentation is we like these little hobbyist trinkety aspects and we could bore someone to death, but we have created the process to re-etch the Chris Craft gauge panels, which are not available anymore, and this is a mermaid off of a Dodge runabout, which was Horace Dodge's project, whose parents were of the Dodge fortune. So we build engine tags for some of the vintage engines. Our largest restoration project, feet-wise, is the 600 and some foot Colonel James M. Schoonmaker. We built a 25-foot lathe to turn that bow pole on the front because they couldn't find anyone to turn that spar. So we had to ship in a 25-foot long by 6 by 6 piece of Douglas fir from northern Michigan. So throughout our restoration process, we acquired a couple old Dart runabout hulls, and we started building parts for the boats that still exist because they were built on Summit Street in Toledo, and we liked the local history aspect of it. We liked the pedigree and the history and the involvement with Prohibition. And so we started building a lot of components for boats that other shops were restoring. This is a windshield for a 22-foot Dart that was done up in Michigan. So we built all the framework. And as more and more needs for components of other shops came along, we developed more and more parts for these boats. And sometimes we would even find original casting patterns or original details as we started rebuilding the Dart factory archive. And so everything on that boat out there is replicas of original components that we built in Toledo. All these pieces are machined locally. The instruments are not made locally. In fact, that boat, if you look really close, has photocopies of instruments because I needed them for a boat that I launched yesterday, so I took the gauges out of it. But figured in case anyone noticed, I better fess up. This is a boat in Sweden. Dart in Toledo was one of the first companies to really export their product during the Jazz Age 1920s. And early 30s. So we have found that there's a market for these boats in Europe, and they like the American product and the mystique. And this boat we built the instrument panel for, some hardware. We cast the little lifting eye cleats and provided him with a steering wheel and throttle assembly so he could complete his restoration. So we're going to switch. Dave is going to be the historian and talk about some of the Dart Boat Company history as we feed into that aspect.
You can say history nerd. I'm the history nerd of the group, so you can advance the slides for me. So the story of the Dart Boat Company begins actually at Indian Lake. It was a happening area in the mid-20s, and there was an amusement park there, and it's crazy. It was in the middle of cornfields, but it was a big congregating area for younger people in the 20s, and speedboats were the big thing. So the story behind the company goes that a guy who owned a lumber yard had a Chris Craft, and it blew up, killing his mechanic, And he went up and got a set of frames from Chris Craft and rebuilt the boat and named it, started his own company from that, used the frames from Chris Craft. So if you look, this is a Chris Craft in the top right, and it's the same name on the side, but all the hardware is different, and it's called a Dart in the bottom picture. So a year later, he was racing this boat that he called a Dart. So he kind of comped the hull from Chris Craft. So very shortly, he began advertising in a lot of magazines, entering races, and they started a pretty extensive dealer network on the East Coast. So they became pretty popular, particularly amongst rum runners. They were very strong, sturdy boats, and as you can see, there's a lot of room where you can stash any contraband you might want to carry. There was a lot of interest amongst younger people, jazz age. We found a lot of pictures of flappers having fun zipping around the lake in these boats. There's one right there. And you can keep going a little faster. I don't know if these are guys. I don't know if these are bootleggers in disguise or actually nuns, but there was fun for everyone in these boats. This is the bay at Indian Lake, actually. They started to kind of modernize the hardware in 1928. Things started becoming more streamlined, Art Deco styling, and the popularity grew, particularly along the coast of Lake Erie and in Toledo. This was one of their 1927 advertisements with the Cherry Street Bridge, and they attracted interest from a number of investors from Toledo. In 1928, the company changed hands, and the whole factory moved up, started production on Summit Street in Toledo. It's now Nova Manufacturing right on Summit Street. And you can see the list of the initial stockholders of the company. There's Secors, Mathers, Spitzers, a lot of big names in Toledo at the time. And the head of the company was Webb Hayes, who was the grandson of President Rutherford B. Hayes. So they obviously had a big presence in the area, and they started a pretty significant advertising campaign. A lot of the major magazines carried their ads, and they did promotions. They introduced 4 different models. Previously, they had 2 different models, and they added an 18-footer, kind of a more budget option, and a 30-footer, which was kind of a sleek, very elegant boat. And they didn't build very many of them. They were pretty expensive, but they started distributing them all over the place. This is out in Idaho, actually, and they were used in races and promoted heavily. They were used in a lot of the same descriptions as some of the biggest boat builders of the day, so they were fairly popular, used on Buckeye Lake for ride boats, and you can keep going. You can go a little faster. The Navy even bought a few as rescue boats for the naval air stations. They were shipped over to England, and there was a promoter out there who had a couple of stunts racing airplanes and trains, and you can actually find footage of these races. There was one that was shipped to the Dead Sea, actually. I don't think it lasted very long. But unfortunately, this was the late 20s, and things didn't go very well for the company. There was a big bank crash in Toledo in 1931, and they had taken out a big loan to build a new section of the factory, and sales just kind of dried up, and it happened to a lot of boat builders at the time, these smaller boat builders. So there's still a lot of really nice darts out there. We've compiled a bit of a registry. There's maybe 40 to 50 still used. So we continually try to keep in touch with these owners to supply some parts. A lot of these boats we've supplied even things as small as cleats, like the little chrome cleats. Scott made a couple for that boat right there. So we try to keep in touch with a lot of these guys and supply parts. And we featured darts at the 2011 Toledo Antique and Classic Boat Show, and there was a 1929 that we featured. So do you want to switch and talk about? We're going to switch again.
So after the development of parts and components, we said, well, the next natural step, since most of the boats that are in existence are in good shape or restored, so what do we do next? Well, we'd like to build replicas. There are several companies that are offering replicas of mahogany speedboats. There's Hackercraft, which is a company with a pedigree and a history. There's Garwood, which is a company with a pedigree and a history. And Dart has an equally interesting history. And so we said, let's reinvigorate this, but let's figure out what the market wants now. And we've just launched our 1931 Dart up on the Ottawa River, and I came to a very abrupt confirmation of what I've been dealing with when I'm dealing with this 800 cubic inch 1931 six-cylinder that's leaking gas. It takes basically 3 people to get the thing functioning properly. So what the market seems to bear for these replicas, individuals want a boat that they can get in, they can enjoy the look, the sound, the feel, but not have to deal with fire extinguishers aimed at the carburetors when they fire it up, or bread pans tied to the stringer to catch gas that's dripping out of these big old brass carburetors. And so we thought, well, one step further is the wood hull maintenance is another issue. So that boat that you see outside is actually a fiberglass hull. That's a boat that has no wood beneath the waterline. It's all fiberglass structure. But it's a company with a pedigree and a history. You can show up to an antique boat show. You won't be docked any points on detail. So the intent was to not compromise on any detail, be true to the heritage of the style, and offer something that would fit in with the guys that really want the look. So that boat is a fiberglass boat. We cut all the planking on a CNC machine. And so while we're doing something else, we have a router with a 16-foot bed. All the planking is cut, even the holes are inserted via computer. And that's Dave's area of expertise. I'm not much of the CNC guy. All of the hardware is cast in a somewhat traditional fashion. We make wooden patterns as necessary, and they're cast at a foundry about 1.5 miles from here. So it's a true local product. A lot of these pictures are the boat you saw, but this gives you a basic idea how the hull is built. It comes out of a mold looking like a fiberglass boat. There's no wood on it. We have a step at the waterline, and we laminate mahogany from there up. And so the decks are also a modern composite construction. And so you can put the boat in the water, launch it, run it, enjoy it, show it off, and put it back with nearly no maintenance compared to a vintage contemporary that would look almost identical. The 16-foot that's out there is kind of our prototype of that technology. We can build all of the hull styles that Dart built using traditional construction, or we call it enhanced traditional construction. We use modern bedding compounds, and they're usable and don't leak, but they don't have the lifespan or the maintenance simplicity of a boat of this style. So it's gotten some decent press. We obviously haven't finished that one. It's got no prop, no shaft, and the running gear's not in it yet. But our intent is to reinvigorate the 22-foot hull design, which is this one. We had a couple original Dart blueprints, and we've kind of backward engineered some of the prints. That's a little bit pixelated, but we have some pretty decent line drawings of all of the different hull models. So the 22.5 is one of the more trailerable popular models, and that's the next mold that we're going to develop, is to build the 22.5 hull. And I don't know what order your slides are in. Oh, so this is in conclusion. So basically, that is what we have evolved to, is going from parts to components to restorations, and we're on the verge of embarking on producing these in several different hull sizes. So we'd be glad to entertain any questions, or if you want an up-close and personal look at the antique boats, there's no better time than this weekend at the Antique and Classic Boat Show, which we are hosting on the 22nd and 23rd, which is this Saturday and Sunday, in conjunction with the National Museum of the Great Lakes. And it looks like we're going to have good weather. We have cruisers as big as 53 feet, I believe, coming in from Algonac. That's probably the biggest boat. Well, the Niagara's coming. That doesn't really count. So it should be a pretty good event. We appreciate you guys having us. If there's any questions, we'd be glad to do our best to answer them. We'll go counterclockwise.
So you said, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you said you saw the first one of these boats when you were graduating college?
Well, that specific reference was to my dad's comment that we were going to be done with his boat in 3 months. That boat that we got in 5th grade didn't launch till I was graduating college, because he tore it apart in his garage and it sat in pieces. And there was an older gentleman who had a boat shop up off of Motzinger, and he allowed us to come into his shop as kids and work kind of independently, but kind of tutoring under him a little bit. So that was a neat experience to get us familiar with the boat shop environment.
So I guess that leads to my next question: is how many of these boats did you actually work on before you felt like you could start up your own company?
We had each restored our own, and we had an automotive restoration business while I was in college and done a lot of car restoration work.
Okay.
So a lot of the early cars have a lot of wood structure, and they kind of both meshed together. And so we had done a couple boats in our automotive shop. The boat market is a lot different than the car market. The customers tend to be, it's kind of like you have the automotive restoration, the boat restoration, and the aircraft restoration, and they're in different echelons. So the boats are kind of in the middle.
Okay.
The airplane guys, it's just you add a 0 for each layer of cars, boats, airplanes. Yes, sir. We'll go with Coke.
Cool. I just want to say thank you so much for keeping alive such an awesome piece of history and such a unique boat style. So if we could all give a round of applause.
Thank you. Tom?
Okay, the boat out there.
Yeah.
If I'm going to buy it. Price.
If you're going to buy it, that boat falls into a really weird price range because it doesn't take much more material or labor to build a 22.5. So proportionately, that's a much more expensive boat. That's about a $65,000 to $75,000 boat, depending on covers, trailers, engine options. A couple of them.
Cash check or money order.
That's also based on all of our tooling because that's our prototype.
Yeah, that's a prototype. So there's a little more cost involved in that one.
Right.
So they'll get cheaper as you start going.
That's right. The more we build, just like Henry Ford, we'll eventually crank out 15 million of
Do
them.
you intend to build those in your shop, or you intend to create a production line?
Well, it's almost kind of a hobby shop scale at this point in time where you're building 1 or 2 boats at a time. We have the space in our 2 buildings, Adams and 20th, that we could probably build several boats at a time. But if we were to build 5 boats a year at the onset, we would be thrilled. It's a pretty unique niche market. I saw other hands, unless we're...
Are you guys having fun? Are you guys having fun?
Most days. Ask our bookkeeper is hiding in the back, my wife Melissa. She's shaking her head. Yes, the financing plan is that you can pay as we build.
We'll build as slow as you can.
Yes, sir. The lady in the back.
We have out in New England, we have a wooden boat that belongs to the New Hampshire Fish and Games Department. And it's sitting in dire need of repair. My brother tried to put it in at one point and it sank. What would one have to budget for reworking a boat like that?
It really depends on the type of hull construction. We have boats that come in for hull repairs where people spend $1,500 to $5,000 in hull repairs, and we have guys that have put $75,000 to $100,000 in a 19-foot boat. So, right, and we were having a conversation in the back of the room earlier on how we're boat psychologists as much as we are restorers, because people come in and say, does it make sense to fix this? Well, very often it doesn't. You can have a very functional 19-foot Lyman that's a great user boat, very fun to use, easy to use. The value might be $15,000, but to restore it might be $80,000. Or you have a Chris Craft Cobra, which is a nearly useless boat, but they're cool and popular, and it is worth $100,000 and might cost $80,000 to fix it. So the market is all over the place. It depends on the boat.
So Henry Ford jokes aside,
yes.
What's the aspiration? Is this 5 boats a year?
The aspiration, based on our current workforce, would be about 5 boats a year at the onset.
But like 5 years down. Hopefully.
5 years from now, it would be nice to be building 10 boats a year. Just looking at what our competitors are doing and what the market bears, I mean, we're going to a relatively, it's kind of like the guys that like Dixieland jazz music.
Right.
Not everybody likes it, but they have a passionate following. And so it's not a huge, broad market. What's that?
You've used that analogy.
That was a new one, because I happen to like Dixieland jazz music too, but I have a problem with liking vintage stuff. Sure, you can have that. Yes, sir.
Do you guys see yourselves, so you're talking about bringing back this awesome wood pattern to this boat, but using modern fiberglass and modern manufacturing techniques. Do you guys see yourself bringing this sort of classic look to modern boating manufacturing techniques, or?
We would like to see more of that, and we're not tied specifically to the 1920s or 30s designs, but frankly, that's what we have patterns for currently. And there is a market for that we're familiar with just from being in the hobby of the classic boat group. But honestly, the market for the new boats isn't really the classic boat guys, because those are the guys that want to tinker with an old engine or they want to fix it themselves. It's often the guys that have a cottage, want to take some guests out in the evening for a ride. They want to know it's going to start, it's going to go, it looks good, and they don't care that it's not old, it looks the part. You had a question?
Yeah, so what are the biggest challenges that you guys are facing now?
The biggest challenges are capital to go from the little boat to building the molds and building the bigger boat. So we built that boat basically just while we're doing restoration work and funded the building of that on our own. So we need to sell that boat or sell one of our original boats to build the tooling for the bigger boats. So capital to proceed is our biggest challenge at most steps of the way.
We're a very small workforce at the moment.
Yeah, we're all here.
Yep. So we are restoring boats with our normal customers and also trying to build new ones at the same time.
Keep the squirrels running.
That's right, that's right.
That's what I was speaking of the tooling. How did you make that lathe?
We had a gearbox that we found somewhere that was like a, I don't know what it was. It was electric motor, some kind of gearbox from who knows what. We bought a bunch of casters at Harbor Freight, fixed casters, and on that CNC machine we turned round discs and cut square holes that would fit the plank. And so we then made a tool rest of 26-foot pieces of 2x6 and a carriage for a router. And so we put a belt around it and we rotated this whole plank on these round things we'd made. And we ran the router back and forth on rails and kept stepping it down a little bit each time.
That's awesome. Did you find
And
some kind of manual
really
construction
out of the box.
no, we just kind of winged it, and we did have a kid who was pretty creative and also young enough that we could just say, hey, sit there for 8 hours a day and turn this pole.
Yeah.
So he ran the router while the little electric motor spun it, and it took him almost a week. A lot of shavings, a lot of noise. We all wore earmuffs for about a week in the shop.
That's impressive.
It is.
Question, I mean, have you looked at or approached any other, like Hershoff or some of the old classic sailboats from the 1800s, you know, that have these classic designs, and approached, because they're still actually manufacturing the original, and approach them with possible collaboration?
We have not meshed with the sailing community much. My father had a sailboat before the powerboat when I was very little, and he had the impression the mast was supposed to face straight down, so it was upside down more than it was right side up, and scared me to death as a kid, and we've never been much of sailors. So I'm familiar.
This,
right, the technology.
Technology, I mean, which is...
The technology is not 100% unique, but it fits well for the hard chine speedboat. A lot of the big sailboats are doing a composite, like a laminated hull, like a multi-ply laminated composite, or they'll have higher tech materials that they're laminating in multiple layers, like a cold molded hull. So this particular, what we're doing with this hull fits better with the smaller speedboats than a large sailboat hull. It's a lot different stresses on a sailboat hull.
We made a connection last year when we took this boat down to Florida with a gentleman who owns a restoration and brokerage, a yacht yard for mega yachts, and he envisions this being, he was advising us a little bit, but he was envisioning this being a good market for the mega yachts, where they'll take two of these and hoist them up on the deck of a big
The runabouts, yeah.
Right, and so when you pull into a big port, you leave it out a little ways and zip into shore in your little fiberglass plastic boats.
It's impressive.
I have a question for you. Like, having a lot of friends that have lake cottages and things, have you ever put your boats on display so people know about your business or something?
The first time that we've done a cottage living show actually was this past winter in Novi.
Oh, in Novi.
So we had some boats on display there.
Have you been to like Clear Lake?
We have not done as much marketing as I would like to do, because that goes along with our capital thing, capital and marketing. Because we're busy in the shop building boats. If we're out of the shop marketing, it pays off eventually, but you got to keep the lights on. So that's, my father retired and came to work for us a few years ago, and so he's done more of the getting around and taking literature to people and doing some of the boat show stuff that we haven't had time to do because we're actually building boats or restoring boats. So that's one of the challenges of being a very small group, small shop.
And we're at a very unique spot in our business where we probably should be hiring a couple of guys to do this and doing the marketing ourselves, but we're both very extremely picky, and the people that we've hired haven't met our standards. So we're kind of we probably are at that point where we could. I mean, we have a boat shop full of 6 or 7 projects right now.
So it's getting over. Right. Yeah, that's. You can have this great product and have it in a little building in Uptown. Nobody knows it's there, which is that we're at the point where we need to get it out. Yes, sir.
So first, I just want to say he's in marketing.
Well, there we go.
In town. But second, so you mentioned you guys are sort of a small outfit right now. Your goal is 5 a year, but you plan to get to 10 a year. A, for your employment, are you able to do that with what you have right now? And B, with your facility and the tooling you have?
With our facility, we have the space. I mean, we're using some of the space for storage right now, which we would gladly get rid of the storage business if we had a reason to produce in that space. Our biggest constraints right now are there's just 2 of us. My dad does some work in the shop, but he's not doing hardcore construction of boats. So we need to get to the point where we can get rid of this boat, build the tooling for the bigger boats, and then a lot of the stuff in boat building, the initial brain power has to be there, but then it's very repetitive. Like ferrying out the side of the boat is laborious and time consuming, but you need to know what you're doing at the onset and what to look for, and then you just repeat and keep going. So we've had, like Dave said, we've had trouble finding younger individuals that we can afford who have the level of detail or want to work with their hands. Because it can't be, we've had guys that apply that say, well, I'm a carpenter. Well, we make about 1 straight cut a week. They're not straight cuts. Everything's curved, everything has to be an eye for a fair line. Because there's still a lot of old school design that goes into building something like this. Like Dave plots a lot of our deck beams into the computer. You need to know the rise of your arc and the run, the total width. But you have to have an eye for what arc you want to put there. I mean, and you've got to be able to design what you want. You can build a CNC boat that's really ugly. I mean, you can design something on the computer that looks pretty hideous. And we've had individuals who've done that.
Do they sell?
No. He then had it built by a shop that even executed his bad design worse. And then he came to us and asked if we designed him something different.
Let's take one more question, but will you guys hang out for a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, one more question. Anyone?
We're all questioned out.
Questioned out?
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.